I think people so dramatically underestimate the importance of interpersonal relationships from the business point of view. And I think that's really been highlighted over the last couple of months where we've all gotten this influx of emails that are all clearly AI generated and based on
Oh,
pirated copies of our books that include, this freakish level of detail about the book and kind of a freakish level of overblown praise for the work and things like that.
hi everyone. I'm here today with Maddie, who's one of my favorite new finds in the fiction world. And this is our third podcast together.
Yeah,
Yes, I
we're
thought we could
chatting frequently.
that's right, which is great.
It
And
is
I thought we
great.
could take the opportunity to talk about Maddie's new project, which is called From Expertise to Authority. So Maddie, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I am Matty Dalyrymple. I write the Anne Kinnear suspense novels and suspense shorts and the Lizzie Ballard thrillers. And I also podcast, write, speak, and consult on the writing craft and the publishing voyage as the Indy Author. And so I have been offering consulting services to primarily writers for many years. And when I first spun up that offering, which I call Chart Your Course, because I'm a big fan of, nautical metaphors. And when I first spun it up, I anticipated that it was going to be, um, you know, writers probably finishing their first book, wondering what they should do with it, wanting to know what their options were, maybe the pros and cons of an indie or a traditional route, maybe some advice about like reputable service providers, things like that. But what I actually found was that I was getting a number of clients who already had a book out, and they were senior professionals who had retired from their main or their first career, and they were looking for ways to primarily continue to be engaged, or they were looking for an opportunity to share knowledge that they had gained on an entirely different topic. And so, for example, one of my clients was formerly a physician. He had retired and he wrote a book about how to have a great retirement. And so he was looking for uh, not really advice about getting a book out because he had already done that, but how could he spread the word about his book to people about this new area of expertise and authority he had established? Like, how did he move from having developed expertise on the topic of retirement to being seen as an authority on that topic? And so um, that was so interesting to me and so tied in with my own professional experience that I decided I wanted to spin up an offering specific to that.
Well, you see, I think this is such a fantastic idea because you are now offering exactly what I'm looking for. I think
Good.
I think there's many of us, right? Especially later career creatives, and we're all losing our jobs with AI and with, in media, right? Media
Yeah.
is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and there's tons of journalists, copywriters, right?
Yeah.
Advertising executives. Like there's a lot of us who are losing our jobs right now and going, we have all this knowledge, and what do I do with it now? And you know what you
Yeah.
do? You talk to Maddie.
Ah. Yes, I've delved into this so much that I now have um I have information on my website, theindyauthor.com/authority. But I also started a Substack because it was interesting because I always try to practice everything that I advise people on. And when I would talk on topics that were kind of similar to this in other forums before From Expertise to Authority was spun up, um, when I talked about establishing authority through writing, people would always ask about Substack, and I would be like, "Well, I don't use it myself, but here's what I understand from speaking to people who use it." And I hate giving that advice. I hate giving advice that isn't based on my own personal experience. And so, one of the sort of primary parts of the From Expertise to Authority framework is how do you build relationships, and one of them is sharing knowledge via the written word. And obviously, I knew Substack was going to come up. So I thought, oh, well, I need to like wade in. I need to give this a try. And so I started a Substack and I found I really liked it. Like I wasn't really expecting to really like it, but I think that Substack is sort of the um, social media for thinking people.
Exactly. You know what? Exactly. It's more, it seems like a friendlier space on the internet
Yeah.
than the
Yes.
other ones so far. I mean, as everybody knows, I absolutely love Substack, and this will be going out on Substack. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's the free newsletter that I think is the most appealing because I think to be an authority in anything, you need to have a newsletter because really that's the only thing you own, right? Like
Yeah.
you own
Exactly.
your subscribers on your newsletter. It doesn't belong to Substack, right? You can
Yeah.
download everybody who follows you, and then if something happened and Substack did go the way of, say, X or became an unpopular platform, you can bring your followers with you. Whereas, if you lose your Facebook account or if you get locked out of whatever, social media, whatever, you lose your followers, right? Like you lose
Yeah.
the content, you lose your followers, whereas your newsletter is yours.
Yeah, well, the two things that I learned from you were one, I sort of knew that I would get the email addresses of people who followed my Substack, but I hadn't somehow made the jump from that's like a newsletter, like an email newsletter. Like I just thought of it as some sort of uh, auxiliary data that was available. And then you had said that you used Substack rather than, let's say, like MailChimp or MailerLite or one of
Yep.
those. And I was like, oh yeah, yeah, that is doing the same work. And then the other thing that I believe you're the person who clued me in on was being able to do a podcast based on Substack.
Right.
And that made it so easy. Like I would occasionally think about spinning up a second podcast in addition to the Indie Author podcast. And then I would think about the distribution and like all the logistics. And it wasn't until you mentioned that I even realized that sending it out as a podcast was possible from Substack. So yay.
Right, I know. And it sends it to almost all the same places. It goes to Spotify, it goes to
Yep.
Apple. Like it's still on the RSS feed.
Yep.
So, and the best part, no fees. That was the thing I was trying to avoid. You can get poor
Yeah.
so quickly. You need to be subscribed to this, and you need to pay for hosting for your podcast, and you need to pay Mailer Lite because you've got too many followers. And then you're getting poor so quickly, not literally, but you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you're having so much output, and then if you're not actively chasing input, which I think when you're building, as you're saying here, you're just trying to build sort of your audience, there's no immediate expectation of a profit. So it's just easier not to have to put all that money out every month while you're sort of building your
Yeah.
expertise, right? So,
Absolutely. And I think that the other nice thing about that mindset is that I think that there's sort of the ideal scenario where like you think carefully through what your areas of knowledge and experience are. You clearly define what your expertise is that you want to get out there. You have this complete idea of what the goals are. And I think that's very unusual. I've already spoken to a couple of people where there's definitely that drive and direction, but there's also just hard work and serendipity. And I think that not making those kinds of investments until you've explored it with what you can get for free or for inexpensive is really valuable because, who knows? In a month, I might say, "Oh, I realize I want to change the name of my offering or something like that," and I haven't invested the same amount of money as if I had, purchased a Riverside subscription and spun up a new website and all those other things. So, um, I am trying to practice with from expertise to authority. One of the lessons I wish I'd known for the Indie Author podcast, which is start simple and work up. Don't start elaborately and then have to pare back when you find some things just aren't serving you and your followers.
is that what you had to do with your indie podcast?
Yeah, well, the easiest example that I always come back to when people ask me this is a transcript. So, when I started out in 2016, there really wasn't like an easy transcript offering. But then I started using a program called Descript, which created like a pretty good transcript, an automated transcript. And I would spend hours editing the transcript. And eventually I just had to stop because I just didn't have the time to do that. And I know some of my followers were disappointed in that. Like some people really liked reading the transcript. And so then the technology got a little better and I went back to offering it, but it turned out to be not that much better that I stopped offering it. And I don't think anybody would have missed the transcript if I hadn't offered it to begin with. But once I had put it out there and then withdrew it, then that was like not a good customer experience, I think.
Right. No, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Well, so I met Maddie through the short story world because Mark invited me to chat with Maddie because they wrote a book together, which is wonderful, called Taking the Short Tack. I'll link to it in the show notes. But I hadn't even really thought of myself as an expert in short stories, but I absolutely am, right? It's the thing
Yeah.
I've been studying for years. This is what this whole Substack is about, short stories. It's me just scratching my own itch where I wanted to know more about the industry and learned about it. And Maddie's made me think, maybe I can go from just being an expert to an authority. And can you imagine being able to take something you're passionate about and make it part of your livelihood? This is
Yeah.
the door that you've opened up to me. So perhaps it's possible that I can take this passion of mine and turn it into a second stage career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what is great about your situation is that you're not only very clearly an expert in short fiction, but you're a very, very deep expert in a specific niche, which is, I'll say, speculative horror, thrillery kind of short fiction on paid platforms where you don't pay
I
to
pay
submit.
fees. That's right.
Yes, exactly. And so you already have like I think that niching down is vital because you could look across the industry and say how many people are out there who are kind of talking about short fiction a lot, but how many are talking about that very specific thing and have the experience that demonstrates the authority that you have developed. And so, yeah, I think that is super cool. And just as you said, when you can marry your interests with all the benefits that come with authority, then that's the ideal.
Right. Except so here's the thing that I found with niching down though is then the pool is smaller, right? And then it's a little bit harder to reach that pool.
Yeah.
So, right? Like, I mean, I have just over 2,500 followers. And I think for this to be viable, I'm going to need about 10,000 followers. And there probably are 10,000 short story writers who like to like write horror, speculative, right? Sci-fi, fantasy, horror. I mean, I do cover other things as well, but because that's my interest, that is what I'm specializing in. And because I don't want to lose tons of money to get rejected. I think paying to be rejected makes no sense. So that's why I'm
Yeah.
like, no fees. I am not going to pay you to tell me you don't want to buy my story.
Yeah.
And then I also think, well, it's also better to get paid. And there are enough paying markets out there that that's why my list is what it is. Paying no fee calls. But Maddie, what do I do to get the message out now? How do I go from this expert to finding my audience for authority?
Well, the first framework that I came up with for from expertise to authority is how do you build your relationships? And so I define three different kinds of relationships. One is building expertise-based relationships, and that's basically where you're sharing your knowledge. And I think written content is the way to do that. And you're already doing that on Substack and via the newsletters that you're sending out and so on. Um, and I think that looking for other platforms where you could share written content, like maybe um, providing articles to magazines or platforms that are also focused on short fiction that would start getting the word out about this and illustrating the advice that you want to share with people, that would be one way to broaden your reach. Um, the second kind of relationship I talk about is building personality-based relationships because with the written content, you've illustrated to people what you know. But then with the personality-based relationships where you're sharing your voice, you let them know you. Because I think that getting people to understand you as a person is a vital part of building authority. And that might look like uh, podcast appearances to talk specifically about this topic. Um, and then finally, the final relationship in the framework is authority-based relationships where you're sharing your mastery of the topic. And then that would be things like teaching courses, um, consulting, having a client pool, like maybe you offer a service that says that you will, for a cut of the proceeds, help place stories for people, or you will read their stories and offer them advice on it for like a per word editorial charge, whatever that might look like. And so with each of those stages, you're potentially opening up the number of people that you're going to be meaningful to without necessarily having to open up the niche that you've chosen to focus on.
Those are all such great suggestions. That's interesting. So I feel like I'm at the starting line, right? So even this conversation with Matty now, I'm trying to get out there. I am actually, okay, I am an extrovert, but I'm very shy about being the face. I'm far more comfortable being the behind the scenes power, right? I love having my work out in the world, but I don't necessarily love having my face out in the world, right? Because
That's interesting.
you
But
have to
and
do things like
you
brush your hair.
so do you think it's actually the literal having your face out there? Like you're saying that you're an extrovert, like is audio a more comfortable form for you than video? Is that the
Absolutely. Absolutely, which is why the podcast does work. But I found it seems silly. So right now we're recording this podcast. I have the video. It's just one more way for people to find you. And a lot of people like to watch, right?
yes.
So I've just
Yes.
newly, in fact, since our last conversation, because, Maddie spoke to me about this before, and I'm like, So I did. I started putting my video out on a YouTube channel. And yes, and I had sort of let my podcast die. I hadn't had new episodes for a long time unless a friend begged me to help them do something. I'm like, please, can you put me on your podcast? I'd be like, okay. But then, it would be like one episode every few months. So I've reignited the podcast, but I've made it easier. I used to feature a short story and then talk to the author. But the amount of time it takes to successfully produce a short story, or I do my own, but sound effects, leveling, getting somebody to read it, making sure that you have all the copyrights in place and that, that author has the rights to have that story out there. It was so much work. And it was, frankly, it wasn't worth it. It would take me hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And then I thought, well, what would this look like if this was easy? That's like the Tim Ferriss thing, right? What would this look like if this was easy? And I thought, you know what? I want to talk to Maddie about from expertise to authority. I want to have that conversation anyway. And I thought this could be easy if I just have the conversation and put it out as a podcast episode. And then
Yeah.
I'm creating the content. I'm building my authority. Plus, I'm doing something I want to do anyway, and I'm making it easy because I'm just going to do minimal editing. And unless, we say something crazy, which I don't think Maddie and I will. Maddie's pretty well professional. She's not going to go offside. Then it's done. So this is why I am doing what I'm doing right now is actually based on your advice to I'm like, this is step one. So I'm just then looking for the next steps. So yes,
Yeah. Well, one thing I would say is you're definitely not starting at zero because you're already sharing your knowledge through those expertise-based relationships on Substack. You're already sharing your voice through the personality-based relationships through the podcast, even if right now it's more irregular. And I do think that you have an opportunity to monetize the authority-based relationships through more paid offerings. I mean, I think there are plenty of people out there who would pay a monthly fee in order to get the information that you're currently sending out about um, open opportunities for short fiction submittals. And so I hope I'm not making any of your free followers angry now, but like I think that that's an opportunity for you. And then the other thing that made me think of is that I think part of that making it easy is repurposing. And so one of the things that my past experience in the podcast production and writing books for authors and things like that enabled me to do is that I want every piece of content to be doing multiple pieces of work. And so I started writing my first Substack article as a way of getting my brain around things like this three 3-level relationship building platform. And so once I was done with that, I realized I had the first chapter of a book.
Right.
And I had a podcast episode because what I end up doing is reading the article, putting it out as a podcast episode, so those are maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 minutes, little short podcast episodes. And then I'm also interspersing those with interviews with people like you, where I have like 5 predefined questions. So I'm not like having to come up with new questions each time. I'm having these conversations and recording them just as we're doing here. I put those up as longer podcast episodes. And by talking through these topics with people who have made that jump, it's helping me crystallize my own ideas and it's giving me more fodder for what becomes an article and then a chapter in the book. And so I think the more, like, if you think of all these as individual efforts, it's an overwhelming amount of work. But if you think of them holistically, then you realize that every piece of content you create can be serving these multiple needs for yourself and serving multiple needs for your followers.
Which is so, that's genius, right? Like that absolutely does work. That's
Yeah.
when I first met Mark Leslie, who was how Maddie and I met.
Yeah.
Like he was the one who's like, if you wrote that short story, repurpose. It's a reprint. It's in an anthology. And I'm like, oh, because short story writing can be discouraging because it does feel one and done, right? It's not like a
Yes.
novel. It's not like your Ann Kinnear series or whatever, where it can continue and you can build on it and grow followers. Short stories feel very much like one and done.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be. And then it's interesting. It's the same thing. Like perhaps even this podcast could be a chapter in a book. I've never
Yes.
felt like that before.
Or you clip out bits and you put them up on social media that will lead people to your Substack or lead people to your podcast or eventually lead people to a service you might be offering or subscription you might be offering, a course you might be offering. Yeah, so the more it all links together, I think both the better it is for the creator, but also the more accessible it is for the people that you want to reach and who want to follow you. Because I know, for example, that there are people who, like, I only listen to podcasts, but I know there are followers of the Indy Author podcast who sit down in front of YouTube and watch the interview. I don't do that, but it's easy for me to make it possible for them to do that.
Right. And then here's something I wanted to get into is you are also a master of the in-person event. And that's another world I'm just kind of learning about. I'm just starting to attend cons, which have all been remarkable. I'm actually very pro con now. But can you tell me how actually like in-person events and putting yourself out there, how does that all tie into from expertise to authority?
Well, I think that part of it is meeting your audience. I mean, one assumes that you're going to cons that are associated with your topic area.
Yeah, not
So you,
HVAC ones or something, no.
yeah, exactly. Um, you can, I think at first, just see what people are talking about, see what the speakers there are talking about. You know, I go to a lot of writers' conferences, and so I see what I can sit in the audience and see what really appeals to the audience and what makes them sit up and take notice and what doesn't work for them. I can see, what kind of presentation styles work and so on. Um, and then the relationship building. I think that the relationships that you can start propagating in those kinds of environments are perfect because you can tell, I have 3 relationship based ways of advancing your authority. And I I think that there's another message that it's almost like a book unto itself, but I haven't quite figured out what the hook is here. And that is that I think people so dramatically underestimate the importance of interpersonal relationships from the business point of view. And I think that's really been highlighted over the last couple of months where we've all gotten this influx of emails that are all clearly AI generated and based on
Oh,
pirated copies of our books that include, this freakish level of detail about the book and kind of a freakish level of overblown praise for the work and things like that. And so
I get so
I
many of
just,
those. I know it's crazy. It's like,
yeah.
Angelique,
And
I
it,
read your, and it's usually some anthology I've been in. So it's not even like I'm like one of 12 stories. And it's like,
yeah.
it's just off, right?
Well, there's so many of these that the markers for me are They're very exaggerated, like I said. They're always from Gmail. They're not from like a, at angeliquefunds.com or at mattydalrymple.com. They're always from Gmail, and they don't have any way of getting in touch with the person other than responding to the email. So if I see those markers, I just delete it immediately. Like I don't even bother reading it. And I know as a result, I'm probably deleting some legit pitches for the Indie Author podcast. But I can't read through all these things. And so when I used to advise people on how to pitch themselves for podcasts, I had this little template that says, well, you describe the value you're providing to them and their readers, and you provide all the information they need in the email and so on. And I'm like, you know what? I don't even bother sending email pitches anymore, because I think it's just going to be buried in this. And
Right.
I primarily, and you and I having met through Mark Lefebvre is the perfect example. Like I pretty much only reach out to people if I can do it through another person and say, "Hey, I would love to meet Angelique. Mark, can you give me a virtual introduction?" And those are the kinds of relationships you can start building up at in-person events like cons.
Isn't that interesting? And that probably is where things are going because it's only going to get worse. The
Yeah.
AI onslaught is on its way.
Yeah, I think that that is really another great example of why relationships are so important, because I'm someone who generally likes Facebook. I've been on Facebook for a long time. I'm active on it for my fiction and nonfiction platforms. Personally, I enjoyed seeing like where my friends were going on vacation and things like that. But I'm using it less and less because there would be like the cute cat video or the cute dog video. And, those were fun. Those were like some brainless entertainment for a couple of minutes each evening. But now it's very clear that many of those are AI generated. And I'm like, I'm really not interested in seeing it
No.
unless it's real. And so it's kind of the same thing with all the junk in our email, in our inbox, that if half the stuff ends up being AI generated and I only want to look at the real stuff, then it's too much trouble. And I'm just going to stop going to those platforms. Um, I have thought about something kind of similar to what you're saying with the Sora avatar or whatever, and that is having an AI platform read my articles, but in a voice clone of my own voice, so it kind of sounds like me. And I've experimented with that. I'm like, no, because that's kind of like the same thing as putting up the cute but AI generated cat video. Like people are going to perceive that that's AI and they're going to skip over it. So more human, more relationship based, I think is the best way for people to be going
I
now.
think it's the only way to go. I think we're going to have to lean into
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very interesting. So you're talking about your three levels of your platform. Let's hit them again.
Okay. So the first level is building expertise-based relationships, and that is where you're sharing your knowledge. That's primarily through written content, as you're doing on Substack with your own area of expertise. It could be, there's the whole question of do you put content up on your own platform, like your website? Do you put it up on a third-party platform where you still own the content, like Substack? Do you perhaps pitch it to platforms or publications that will help get the word out? But that's all primarily written content. The personality-based relationships, and I think that's what we're hitting a lot here, that idea that sharing your voice, your actual human voice,
That's right.
is super important. And I'm a big fan of podcasts, so that's something I always recommend, either as a guest or a host. Letting people get to know you, because that's an important part of authority building. And then that idea of sharing your mastery, and this is when you've already established those relationships that people recognize you as an authority, and now they want to connect with you one-on-one, um, or in a group. Like that's when you start doing talks, or that's when you start offering courses, or that's when you start offering consulting. And so those are those are three sort of sequential steps in the framework of building authority, but not everybody has to go through all of them. Like if uh, if I have a client who's really interested in staying engaged, but they're not that worried about income earning, maybe they never go to that third level. Maybe they're happy just interacting with people because that's serving the goal that they have, which is staying connected and relevant. And then if there's someone who's really focused on income earning, then maybe they go through those first stages more quickly so that they can get to the third stage, which is more more a monetization stage.
So where can people find you, Maddie, if they want to learn more about this?
So if you go to the indieauthor.com, and that's indie with a Y, INDY, the indieauthor.com/authority, you will then be able to get to all the other places I'm talking about this. My Substack. I have recently repurposed my very sparsely populated Matty Dalrymple YouTube channel to be specific to From Expertise to Authority, so you can find videos there. I have the thanks to you, thanks to your advice, I have the From Expertise to Authority podcast. And then I would also love opportunities to speak to groups or just to speak to individuals who are looking for advice on how to make this move from expertise to authority.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. This was so much fun. It's always lovely speaking to you, Angela.
Same here.